Now, the United States has imposed entry restrictions on more Nigerians for undermining the democratic process during the 2023 general elections. The action is the latest in a series of visa restrictions imposed on Nigerian individuals in recent years. Nigeria's election tribunal this month was to begin hearing opposition petitions challenging President-elect Bola Tinubu's victory in the disputed February presidential vote. Let's now turn to former Nigerian Consul General in Atlanta, that's Ambassador Joe Keshi, to share his perspective on the effectiveness or otherwise of the U.S. imposition of visa restrictions on Nigerian electoral offenders and how it could help strengthen democracy in the country. Good afternoon, Mr. Keshi. Thank you for joining us here on Newsday. Or Ambassador Keshi, I should say.
And thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, Ambassador, let's begin.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Let's begin with the basics. This is not the first time, we've seen any visa restrictions. We've seen something similar in preceding years. Just wondering how effective you think this particular restrictions would be in actually dissuading electoral offenders to refrain from such activities.
Well, it depends on how the U.S. implements its decision. But the truth of the matter is that it's not really good enough that another country is imposing its will on us, and more because we have refused to do the right thing. We have refused to punish offenders who have broken the laws of this country. And so we are all excited that another country is doing this for us. It's not good enough. And secondly, the U.S. itself has not really named the people that they are imposing these visa sanctions on. It's very important, if it's going to have any impact at all, for them to be kind enough to name the people that they are imposing sanctions on. Because if you want to go by the last election, it will be a huge list of people across board, from INEC officials, both at the federal level, at the commission, and at the state level, various things that were done by INEC officials, or what they call them, returning officers and the rest of them, not to talk of members of the security forces. The list would be huge. So it would be helpful if the list is published, and that would really, but if anything is going to be meaningful, it is what the government at home does that will be more meaningful. If it decides to take those who created problems during the election, if it decides to take them through the court process and possibly jail a few of them. And I've said this before, including some state governors. And until that is done, every election year, we're going to come back and have this conversation. The U.S. will decide it's going to sanction people, and then, life goes on as normal.
All right, Ambassador Keshi, it's almost a paradox here because, first of all, the U.S. are not just talking the talk, they're also walking the walk. But here in Nigeria, the president has actually given a pass mark and actually hailed the process as being very, very transparent. And it seems to be a contradiction left, right, when you look at it closely. Because on one hand, the U.S. have said that they are not happy with the outcome of these elections and the dramatic personnel within the sphere of the elections have been sanctioned. But on the other hand, the president and the APC are still insistent that the process was almost flawless.
What do you expect them to say? 2 years after his defeat and the way and manner he left office, President Donald Trump, or former president of the United States, is still claiming that he won the election and that he was rigged out. And everybody knows, of course, the truth, that he lost the election. And so we find ourselves in the same situation, that the president and his party are claiming they won. And, the other parties have clear evidence. I was just reading one here in your studio, the BBC report about Rivers. Rivers remain a very controversial one, Look, it's the nature of politicians to do things like this. Since the election ended in this country, the APC has done extremely well in creating the narrative it wants the country to believe that the election was free, fair, and credible. And regrettably, and I must say this, regrettably, the media has also helped them to push that narrative. I'm reading, as I said, here in your studio, a report by the BBC, whether an investigation team or things like that, which Nigerian media house or journalist has tried to do any serious investigation to counteract these other narratives? Practically none that I know of. And that is part of the weakness of our system, part of the weakness of democracy. We are waiting for the people outside to do something to us or for us in this country. Whereas some of the things we should do to convince ourselves that we need to make some changes, we just all flow, go with the flow. We've accepted the result. You journalists have moved on. You help create the narratives that they want created. Who has done an investigative journalism to contradict these things? Just months after any election, even in South Africa, you see a lot of reports, books on the election. In this country, nothing. We all just move on. It has gone, it has gone. Let's accept it. Yeah, of course, some people tell you it's God's will. So whether it's a paradox or not, that's the reality that here we live in. Go and read the reports. Go and read the report of all the domestic and local observers, all the local and international observers, and see and read what they said about this last election. And you will understand the point they are trying to make. But you guys ignore that, and then you allow others to project what they want to project, and you call it a paradox. It's a paradox that we are living with, and obviously, because that's the only narrative there. We need something more credible to show people. How many times has the results of any of those international reports or local reports been so highlighted and put out in the public space, as we are doing now because the U.S. decided announced that it will punish those who rigged the election in Nigeria, or those who try to rig the election in Nigeria, whichever one they want to do. But look, the point is, a lot of things went wrong in our last election, period. The second thing is that if we want to have a very clean, credible, free, fair election in this country, we must begin to hold people accountable. We must begin to punish, and that's what the law says. We must begin to play by the rules, play by the law books. We know them. There are videos of what people did during the election. There are inside the video, you find those who who violated the election rules. In other times, the police would have put these videos together and begin to look for those people to prosecute them. And I'm not sure the police in Nigeria, that's their concern. Their concern is, helping to put in place the next administration, and life goes on.
Noted, Ambassador Keshi. Regarding what you mentioned much earlier about the effectiveness or how effective this visa restriction will be, that we need to see work internally done by the government. What do you make of the fact that, as at this time, there's been no reaction? The government has basically kept mum regarding this gesture that was made by the United States in terms of the visa ban. What message does this send, whether it's to the US, to the electorate, or to even the offenders who have been targeted in this case?
Well, look, silence itself is a policy. To keep quiet, it's a policy. You just decide that it's not worth your time to comment on things like that. And besides, the U.S. has just announced it's possible that they have not even communicated to the Nigerian government, and for me, it really doesn't make sense even to communicate to the Nigerian government without putting on that letter the names of those that have been so affected. It's very important to have the names so that we know. And that will enable people in this country to question why the people themselves will not be sanctioned at home. So the government is probably right. If they've not received any official communication from the United States, they probably won't react. No government reacts on everything you read in the newspapers. That's the honest truth. And government officials will tell you that they don't react to events based on newspaper, publications, when it suits them, by the way. But the truth is that there can be no reaction until they receive an official communication from the U.S. government that this is what they've done. Then they can react. But then if it does not contain the names of the offenders that they are targeting, for me, it doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't make much sense.
All right, some critics have actually said the U.S. should stop acting like the police of the world and probably try to mind their own business and let Nigeria, being a sovereign state, handle her affairs. What do you have to say in regards to people that have this kind of notion?
I think it was sometime this week. I don't know when exactly, but it was in. I think it was in the back page of This Day, a very small caption of what the VP said about the attitude of some Nigerians about condemning the country and the rest. The truth of the matter is that no Nigerian will leave this country or will deliberately begin to criticize its own country or condemn its own country if there are no good reasons for that. Let's establish that. The second thing is that go and look at the people who are saying, when it suits them, they make that kind of comment that Nigeria is an independent, sovereign country, and so it's not the business of the United States to want to police the world. When it suits them, they make that statement. When it does not suit them, they look for the support of the United States. Go back. Remember what happened in 1915. The same people who are making that statement were seeking for the blessings of the United States government. The same people who are making that statement were seeking for the blessing of the United States government in 2015. Remember that. And John Kerry was coming in and out of this country, making the same statement that they would discipline anybody. So, look, when it suits, this is a problem we have in this country, the lack of integrity of the people who should know better. That's part of my disappointment with the whole election process in the last 9 months. That those you expect, those with high intellect, those who know the truth, will rather choose to play the ostrich and then help to push a different narrative. Yes, today, it suits them. Oh, the United States cannot intervene in our affairs because we're an independent country. Sure, but let's also remember that we live in a global village today, and that what happens in this country is being observed in other countries, and that people are watching and deciding what to do. So you can't just take one and drop the other. No, you must create a balance. And we ask our leaders and some of their supporters to be very honest with themselves. Instead of complaining against the United States of America, and if these people who are saying what you just said are serious and they love this country, it is not to condemn the United States. It is to ensure that our electoral process moving forward works very well for everybody, not for a few riggers. It is when we do that that we earn credibility, that we earn the support and admiration of the world. So it shouldn't just be that one group of people, they are happy with the situation and therefore the United States cannot tell us what to do. Okay, let's accept the United States cannot tell us, but can we do what we need to do? Punish offenders who commit crime in this country for goodness sake. And then the United States will not intervene if you do that. But you are not doing that. Instead, why don't you call on the police to go and arrest all those who committed one offense or the other during the electoral process? And there are so many, and I repeat myself, including state governors, including police commissioners, including police officers, including DSS officers, including INEC officials. So why don't you put them together and punish them? And the world will celebrate you for ensuring that the law of your country is working. This is what some of us are demanding. We are not saying the US is right or wrong. We are saying let us do exactly, let's not wait for the US to take action against offenders in Nigeria. Let the system work for us, for goodness sake. That's what we are saying. It's not a question of whether we're a sovereign state, so let's behave like a sovereign state. Part of being a sovereign state is that we have rules and regulations that govern our existence in this country. So let's make it work for us and and everybody will celebrate this country. Pure and simple.
Duly noted, Ambassador Keshi. So back to this visa restriction that's been placed by the United States. In addition to making the offenders' names public, what do you make of a potential collaboration with other countries? Seeing as there are so many options in terms of how many countries there are in the world, if we saw similar gestures from allies of the US, do you think it would also strengthen this gesture?
Well, I'm not too sure that, quite frankly, as things are today in the world, I'm not too sure that other countries would bother themselves about, taking similar actions. Quite frankly, I'm not too sure. But they will continue to hope that we can grow up and that we can do things better, than we've done in previous elections. So the British, for example, spent a lot of money, in training, in ensuring the rules are in place and doing all sorts of things to help us have a free, fair, and credible election. Other international agencies, including the UN, including the Commonwealth, they would all continue to hope and pray, put in some resources, train people, and hope that we'll get it right someday. I think that that's what many countries want to help us would do. They probably won't take the kind of similar action that the United States, has done. But the US claims is doing this as a result of its policy of defending and ensuring democracy around the world.
All right. What advice would you have for the incoming administration that is coming? Because I'm looking at the G20 summit that should hold in India in September. And, of course, President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu is part of the invited guest for that particular G20 summit. Nigeria has been playing a lesser role, if you look at how things play out in the global scale in time past. For quite a while, right, we're playing a more reclusive role on the global stage. What advice would you have for the incoming administration to help Nigeria position itself like Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa has actually done?
Look, you've actually answered the question yourself by naming a few countries that have done a few good things. Look, I'm not too sure that anybody today will listen to whatever advice I have to offer in terms of what should be done, particularly because you mentioned the G20. What we have seen in this country is that in the last 8 years that we've been invited, whether to the UN or so on, we have attended. But what message have we conveyed? If I were seriously to advise the next administration, yes, they've been invited, but the question is, what are you going to tell? What are you going to say to the world, when you get to these conferences? So this is why the best thing to do is to focus on fixing a number of things at home. When you begin to fix a number of things at home, number one, the world will take notice. Number two, when you go out after you fix a couple of things at home, the world will even respect you more and admire you. You'll actually be welcomed, as a hero who is doing a lot of things at home. So the first thing is not to rush out to all these conferences. For 8 years, our foreign policy was just to attend one international conference or the other, even the ones that we have practically no business in attending. So the best, because there's a nexus, there's a relationship between domestic and foreign policy. So the starting thing, in order for us to be able to command that respect, recognition, and to be able to pursue, to be able to stand before the world and be seen as credible. Starting place is to fix a couple of things at home. I'm not saying fix all. I'm saying fix a couple of things at home. If in the next 100 days, the incoming administration can perform some magic, all well and good. It will change a number of minds. It will create hopes. And the outside world will certainly take notice. And so when the president goes out at that time, in particular, people will also have advice to give us. So, look, we see what you are doing. We'll be ready to help you. We'll be ready to do A, B, C, D. But if you go without having laid out your policies, without having put in a number of things in place, exactly, they won't know what to do themselves because they have no idea of the direction that you want to go. So my advice is, first, don't be in a hurry to jump into the world. You can do a couple of, look, for about 20 years, we seem to have forgotten that China closed its borders. But they were doing a lot of things inside China. It was the last Olympic in China, I'm trying to remember the year now, that China showed the world what it has become. And everybody was surprised that, wow, this is China. But for 20 years, it was a closed society. Its leaders never bothered to show up in any conference. They never bothered to show up in any conference. But 20 years after, when they gradually opened up, the world began to say the Chinese miracle. We can do the same thing if we are very serious. And if our ego doesn't carry us, to start flying around.
Noted, Ambassador Keshi. Now, just before we let you go, I'm sure you know yesterday the Federal Executive Council, they approved several billions of naira worth of contracts at the twilight of the end of this administration. And there's a perception that the U.S. is focused on entrenching democracy at the expense of transparency. Based on that, I'm wondering how you'd rate President Buhari's anti-corruption policy in the past 8 years.
Look, there was no anti-corruption policy to start with in the last 8 years. For all those in government, this has been their glorious years. I mean, it's been wonderful for many of them in government. Look, the list of what happened is there. But the government functions until the last day. That's the honest truth. It functions until the last day. But what they could have done, as some previous administration had done, certain decisions should have been left to the next administration. The way people are rushing so many, memos for expenditure at the federal level, these days, really it's a bit worrisome. And I think that, look, I give you one that particularly worrisome to me, because you mentioned the Federal Executive Council approving budgets. I can't remember whether it was the Yar'Adua administration or the Obasanjo administration, of which I was a permanent secretary in both. I think one of them approved for the construction of the second runway at this airport. And I stand to be corrected. I remember very well that a memo was brought to council, because I was at some point permanent secretary to the to the Federal Executive Council, Cabinet Secretariat. A memo was brought for the construction of the second runway of this Abuja airport here. And only last week, a memo was approved for 3.5 billion for consultancy, for not to build, for consultancy. By the way, why do you need to do another consultancy? Julius Berger built the airport, or whoever built the airport has a master plan, even for, I'm sure, for a second or for a third runway. Why don't you just call the company and ask the company how much will it cost to build a second runway, which is long overdue? But instead, we've gone back to start with constituency 2 months or 2 weeks to the end of an administration. Does that make sense? Now, if you say that people are not being transparent, some people in government get upset. So for goodness sake, why is this happening? It's because there has been no serious desire on the part of this administration to control corruption, period.
All right, I want to say many thanks to you, Ambassador Joe Keshi, for your time here on Newsline.